Guest on Jacqui Deevoy. Welcome to the UK Column News, Jacqui. And you're going to tell us a bit about your work and what you're seeing as the huge risks to people in the system.
Yes, good afternoon, and thank you for inviting me on the show. My name is Jacqui Deevoy, and I've worked as a freelance journalist for over 30 years now. In the last 3 years, I've been investigating euthanasia in care homes and hospitals. Now, I know that's quite a difficult thing for a lot of people to get their head around, that it's actually happening, but it is. So it's all began when a man came to me 3 years ago to tell me that his relative had been killed in an NHS facility. And so he had a huge pile of incontrovertible evidence at the time, which I went through with him, and it was pretty obvious that that is exactly what happened. His loved one had been actually killed, drugged to death in an NHS facility. Now, at that time, my own dad was in a care home, and I just found out that he'd had a DNR put on his file. That's a do not resuscitate order, which at the time were being put on, there were blanket DNRs going on. They were being put on people in care homes, people being admitted into hospital who are over 60. I spoke to several whistleblower doctors at the time about this. They're even being put on people who are disabled, mentally and physically disabled, even on children with autism and people with mental health issues. So it's pretty shocking, and I couldn't really work out why this was going on at the time. This was very early on in 2020. So I wrote a few articles and did some interviews on the subject, and other people started contacting me with similar stories. So once I'd spoken to about 20 people who told me that their loved ones had been euthanized, mainly in care homes and hospitals, I contacted the national newspapers, thinking that they would be very interested in this story. I arranged meetings with two of them, the news editor on the Daily Mail and the medical editor on Mail on Sunday. We had face-to-face meetings. I brought the man along with me, the man who came to me originally, with his huge file of evidence. And the editors were, at first they didn't really believe it, but by the end of the separate meetings, their jaws were on the floor. I always say that because they could see that it had happened and that it was happening. And so both of them separately said, well, this is headline news. It should be on the front pages of all the newspapers. This is shocking. It's the story of the century. And off they went with the copies of all the evidence that we had at that point in time. And But over the next few weeks, going into a couple of months, they just gradually stopped communicating with me. They went very, very quiet. In fact, one hasn't answered any of my emails since August 2021. So I kept trying to get the story out there. No one was interested. I was then approached by Iconic Films, who suggested making the story into a documentary. So we did that. I showed that to the mainstream editors as well, still not interested. In fact, after the premiere, a BBC reporter reported it as a conspiracy movie. There was a brilliant researcher called Wayne Smith, who I'd been talking to for some time, who'd been investigating the death of his father back in 2013 when he was killed by a district nurse, I believe. Someone came to the home and injected him with Midazolam and morphine, and he died on the spot. So Wayne had been investigating this, and he was due to appear in the film with some other people. But about a week before our initial meeting, he was found dead at home, which was really shocking. The police sneeringly told me on the phone that he'd died of COVID, and I asked them why the tone of voice, and they said because he was one of those people that didn't believe in COVID, and then he died of COVID. They were like kind of joking about it. It was horrendous. Myself and a doctor friend, Dr. Mark Jones, contacted the coroner at the time to try and find out what happened, and they said he'd been tested posthumously with a PCR test and had been listed as having COVID because the test came out positive. So in the film, I have 6 people telling the most horrifying stories of how their loved ones were involuntarily euthanized in care homes and hospitals. And I also talked to Dr. Patrick Pulicino, who some people may be familiar with. He's a retired priest. He's a retired neurologist and a Catholic priest. He's been speaking out against these awful end-of-life practices for over a decade. And he says the drugs that are used in end-of-life pathways, usually a benzodiazepine called Midazolam and an opioid, usually morphine, should never be used concomitantly. So they shouldn't be used together. And when they are used together, especially when they're administered continuously via a syringe driver, which is like a pump, that it almost always results in death. Also in the film, I talk about the new NICE guideline, NG163, which was brought in April 2020. It's identical to the Liverpool Care Pathway, which was abolished in 2014 as it was deemed to be inhumane and barbaric. And this new protocol, this new guideline, was used to treat people presenting with respiratory illness using high doses of these drugs, midazolam and morphine. And this invariably led to the deaths of the people receiving them. Over the last 3 years, I've heard many stories of people who hadn't been tested for COVID and hadn't been diagnosed with it, hadn't had any positive results, yet they were still given huge doses of these drugs. And they died because of it. And these people were not terminally ill. And I know you mentioned earlier that the elderly, they weren't always elderly. So, back in 2020, the then Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, had consulted a panel of 2 professors and 9 doctors about this new guideline, NG163. They all agreed it was dangerous, it was not to be used. They outlined this in a letter to the British Medical Journal, the BMJ, which is available online if anyone wants to have a look at it, for everyone to see. Hancock ignored the experts' advice, and the guideline was subsequently put in place. I also mentioned in the film the huge order that Matt Hancock made for extra supplies of midazolam in April 2020. The 22,000 packs, which was a 2-year supply that he ordered, cleared out a factory in France and was gone in a matter of months. Hancock was filmed at a House of Commons meeting on April the 17th, 2020, discussing supplies of midazolam with the MP, Dr. Luke Evans. Earlier this year, Matt Hancock committed perjury when he stated he'd not heard of midazolam until a protester called Geza Teriani shouted the word at him in the street in January 2023. The recording of the April 2020 meeting proves that he was lying in court. When I was making the film, I set up a group of a group for the contributors just to keep them all in one place. And that group has now become a support group. We have 99 members as of today, all of whom are relatives of people who were involuntarily euthanized in UK care homes and hospitals. Since 2021, I've continued to research this. My dad died at the hands of paramedics that year, 2021 in September, after a fatal reaction to something he was injected with, but that's another story. I don't have all the evidence on that yet. So I've not been focused on that. I've just been focusing on trying to help the people who do have the evidence. And people have continued to come to me with their stories, each one more sickening than the other. They've lost mothers, fathers, husbands, wives, uncles, aunts, cousins, siblings, children, and in one case, a grandchild. The devastation these murders have caused is absolutely unimaginable to anyone who's not suffered the trauma that these people have been through. It's absolutely awful.
Jacqui, if I can just come back in and say thank you very much for that very comprehensive summary. And of course, the film that you're referring to in the first instance is A Good Death, but you're also working on a new film, Playing God. And your dedication to this is really amazing. We are going to do our best to give you some support and give people a voice to speak out. So I hope that we'll be able to get some of those people to join you with the UK column in order to talk in more detail about what happened to their loved ones. But I'm going to say thank you very much for giving us that summary. And of course, you will be with us for UK column extra. So for people joining us after the news, we'll be discussing things in more detail with Jacqui. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, thank you. Let's move